Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a work session meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for April the 9th, 2024. And I'll go ahead and call the roll. Councilor Weatherholt.
Present.
Councilor Wolf.
Here.
Councilor Chandler.
Present.
Councilor Johnson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Present.
Councilor Shada. Here. And the mayor is also here. Great. Everybody came to work. Good. All right. We just have one item tonight. That is a discussion of the Mountain Metro, presentation by Mountain Metro on the 2024 transit options. So we have Juan and Jacob here. Gentlemen, you have the floor. And if you'll give us your name and titles, please.
Hello, Council. I'm Jacob Matson. I'm the Planning Supervisor with Mountain Metro Transit.
Probably about
They're mobile.
about 3 inches or so. That's good. Thank you, Jacob.
You got it.
Juan Alvarez, Mobility and Parking Director.
Well, thank you, Council, for having us back here. With the presentation this evening, I want to kind of go over kind of two main points that are in your packet there. Kind of wanted to explain what our service change process is, so you kind of are in the loop, kind of a little bit of what goes into it, actually quite a bit of what goes into it. Want to go through an explanation of that and kind of why our timing is the way that it is, so that you guys can get a good understanding of why we just can't, with a month or two notice, just jump into something. There's a lot of reasons why we go through what we go through. We have a whole long process about it, and just want to go through that for the first half. And then the second half, go over some of the different service options we've talked about in the past. These are not new. To see if there's a interest in pursuing a different option for the Route 36. So with that, I'll dive into our service change process. So generally speaking, and in my entire time at Transit now, almost 8 years, we've gone through pretty much 2 service changes every year. We do a fall and a spring service change, roughly 7 and 5 months apart from one another. It does follow a cyclical pattern, and the service change for the spring will typically finish up and go into implementation by the end of April. And for the fall, it's end of September. Last year, technically, it was October 1st. So it's basically right in that approximate time frame, but pretty close with it. So what I have here and on the screen, not sure if it's all too easy to see, but kind of gives you a really simple breakdown of kind of the timing of our service change. This is kind of our schedule. I'm really focusing here on the public outreach perspective. In the back end, current service change process, I can identify like 90 different tasks, somewhere around that amount of what we kind of go through for everything. But focus for this slide is on the public process and kind of where that falls in. So pretty much, as you can see, the top part of this is the spring service change, and the bottom is the fall. They follow a very similar time frame, albeit the months are different, obviously. So with this, the first kind of part that initiates that change is kind of identifying what our service changes are going to be for the upcoming change cycle. You're only seeing kind of that little half month there in December, pretty much by mid-December for the spring, and then again by mid-May for the fall service changes, when we need to know exactly what we're doing to initiate the rest of our process. In reality, you can take that little line and run it further back. We're constantly looking at where we can make service improvements, taking feedback from the public, looking at our various key performance indicators and that sort of thing to kind of bring up what we're looking to do for our next service change. Also included in that process would be identifying funding sources for different service changes. So that's kind of that first part. Then we kind of go through an internal process before putting out to the public. That takes about that month and a half. We are depending on the type of service change, and I won't go into the great detail of this, but depending if it's a major or a minor, that will dictate the level of public outreach we have to do. But for a general sense, this right here is pretty much what we go through. So pretty much as we go into the February timeframe for the spring service change, we look to alert the public and give them some level of time to respond, typically a 2-week period. So we'll propose that to the public, put that out there for public comment. We'll get it through a series of ways, whether it be through email correspondences, through phone calls, or through even Facebook comments. We'll compile all that together. We bring it back and we review that and see if any changes need to be made to our proposal. And from that point, we'll identify changes if changes are needed. And it's hit or miss depending. Sometimes we make some slight tweaks to some things. Last fall, we made a slight tweak on our 37 route, which is our airport route, airport and Amazon. We made a small change based on public feedback and put that in there. This time around, we didn't get any significant public feedback for changes. So there's just this process of wanting to make sure that we're taking the public's comments into our perspective and making sure that we're addressing those where they need to be addressed. And then from there, we draft that final change and we put it out and alert the public for implementation. And that pretty much we want to give a month's notice for that. So that's kind of this the schedule here in a nutshell. So what this next slide is here, this kind of shows what our current spring service change. I wanted to kind of show you with the current process, looking at what I just spoke about and kind of how it filtered into our recent one for this spring service change. So on the 14th internally with Mountain Metro, we discussed this amongst all of our staff of here's what we're looking to do. Took questions in, kind of redrafted it, molded it, but right around that time is when we kind of identified what we were looking to do. On January 26th, we completed what was called a Title VI threshold analysis. And what this kind of looks into is whether or not we're creating, if there was, well, first of all, is there a need to do a deeper study into whether or not we have a disparate impact on minority groups. So we look into that to make sure we're not disproportionately impacting minority groups. And then once we kind of got through this process, we also looked at ADA impacts and all sorts of other system impacts as well. Other impacts on our riders. From there on February 13th is when we did that proposal. We gave it a 14-day notice or 14-day period for public comment. And on February 27th, we assembled that, looked at that internally. And then back on March 20th is when we put out the final service change implementation for the public to know what we're doing. And then the final step will be on April 28th, where everything goes into effect. That is a Sunday. Everything will go into effect on that day and we'll proceed forward from there. This list here of different things that we consider or things we have to consider as we're doing service changes is definitely not exhaustive. I've kind of picked some of the big ones that are more that can potentially be more time consuming. So what you have this list here is kind of what we look at as we're doing it. The more involved the service changes, the more this comes as a issue or a concern, or more time may be needed. But in general, contract negotiations, we do have triggers in our contracts with our different contractors where if certain levels of service are increased or decreased by a certain amount, it requires negotiations on the contract. They also need to be alerted so that they know they can get the proper amount of drivers in the period of time that is needed for the service change. We look at additional capital investments. The most current service change, we're looking at building out a few more bus stops. So we got to take that into consideration and the different levels of review that takes into consideration. The third bullet here about transit planning software, basically on the back end of everything, think of it simply as the kind of the IT world. We have to input everything in that goes into what feeds out to Google, what feeds into our internal system. So when the drivers are out there, and I don't want to go into great detail and everything, but when the hops in the bus, there are certain things that are updated in the bus itself that need to come from our backend software. This process here is a good 2 to 3 months, depending on the severity or the impact of the service change. So this can be a rather lengthy process. Even simpler ones take at least upwards of 2 months. I kind of hit up on the item 4 there. Number 5, this is more of our public communications, getting maps and schedules out there in time. We're currently for the spring service change, going through a final review of those, making sure that all the time points are updated in the schedules, making sure our maps are accurate to what we're doing, and just making sure that there's quality control on all of our marketing items that go out. And then finally, as I mentioned before, there's that threshold analysis that we go through. So I will take a break here. This is actually the end, I think, of the service change. Yes, this is a good time for a break in questions.
I think
Thank you.
Julie was,
It's a threshold. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Did you have?
yeah, I think okay.
Well, I was just wondering, I'm very curious about this Title VI threshold analysis. Is this something that you do every year? And could you give me a little bit of background of what data that you're looking for when you do that?
So yes, this is with every single service change that we do. So we have an individual that's on staff that does this aspect for us. And what they do is they take basically the data for a given area and make sure when it comes to impacts on minority populations that we're not inadvertently creating a larger than is allowable impact on those communities. And typically when you're adding or taking away service. So you're not favoring one ethnic group over another, one racial group over another. It's a way to make sure you're not giving better service and you're discriminatory in that practice. Yep, you're welcome.
Julie?
I was just curious about the comment in the previous slide about improving bus stops. Does Mountain Metro pay to improve the bus stops in Manitou, or do we have to do that ourselves?
So under the IG that we have, City of Manitou does its own bus stop improvements.
We do. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, then I won't ask you to improve our bus stops.
Anything else before I continue?
You can go ahead.
All right. So this is the second half where this pretty much gets into kind of showing the information we've given you in the past, and just wanted to see if there's any interest in pursuing additional options for the Route 36. So this should be a refresher here. We have those 3 different options. There's a 20, a 30, and a 40-minute option, depending on where you're looking to go. The option 1, which is what we're currently doing. This is the map you guys have seen in the previous council meetings. So there shouldn't be anything new here. And then with this, as we talked about last time, there's some pros and cons to the option 1, which is keep in service as is with the 20-minute frequency going from Fields Park over to the Schmishny lot and back and forth. We did make one change with the spring service change coming up. We know there's been some concerns of us laying over by Fields Park, so we've kind of shifted up what we have in the back end, the software I referenced that we have to update. And so our layover where the bus kind of stands by is over by the Schmishny lot. And I still don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, despite coming from an area that has lots of words that are like that. So yeah, nothing particularly new to this slide, outside of the fact that it's kind of doing what we're currently doing. So option 2 is that idea to do the Safeway option. Under this option, we would not continue up to the Schmishny lot. We would take that turn at the Ruxton roundabout and take it down to the Safeway. And this is the kind of the first thing that kind of springboard to this discussion of, do we want to make changes to 36? This is what we had discussed with the Public Works team here with Manitou. And just want to say there needs to be a few corrections to this one, and we were talking right before, so I'll let Juan kind of explain a few things that fell under the pros and cons that need to be discussed in this slide.
Yeah, so on the cons, where we wanted to include no door-to-door service. And one of the reasons for that was that this is more geared towards the residents that live up in hills and steep grades, where they have to come all the way down. It's a bit of an inconvenience for them to come down and pick up another route, to go to their destination. And that's one of the things that we also that's why we included also that it's very limited with residential use.
And just to be clear, you're referring to kind of the ideas with the, oh my gosh, drawing a blank right now. With the shuttle, I'm drawing a blank there. Yeah.
The whole idea initially was to use the tramps to pick up the residents, when they're going uphill, and bringing them back down so that they could pick up the shuttle, down where the stops are. But because right now we're still testing them and they've been unsuccessful, going uphill, that it's been a little bit of a challenge. So that's part of what we're exploring, and we'll be done with our gathering that data by the April 14th.
And to kind of put it in perspective, the idea was to be funneling that into what option 2 was from from Mountain Metro's option 2 for the Route 36. So yeah, so I was saying is the idea was what Juan was kind of getting at was the tram would kind of filter into the option 2, which is what Mountain Metro's doing. Yes. Sorry, I was turning as I was talking that. My apologies. And then option 3 was that 40-minute option. That was the one that not only went to Safeway, but also continued to serve the Fields Park area, as well as went in and around the area by 10 Old Man's Trail, but also did not serve all the way up to Serpentine. It stopped over at the Ruxton roundabout. And once again, some of the pros and cons from that option. I think the biggest concern that we've talked about in the past year was the fact that 40-minute frequency is challenging for what you guys are hearing from your residents in terms of what they want. So there's that to consider with this. So kind of getting back to the discussion about the upcoming service change. So there's kind of these two kind of different options on the table. One is the options we're talking about here, options 1, 2, and 3 for Route 36, but also this discussion of whether or not you all want it to run year round. For 36, if you are interested in 36 running year round, we would need to know that no later than May 14th, as well as any changes to the route. If the thought is that it does not need to run year round, we just keep running it as is. We find out more information from the shuttle, from the tram, we get data from that. And you're looking potentially in the future to change it. That could then shift to that December timeframe in terms of when we would need to know options 1, 2, or 3. But really at this point, if we were to do anything different in the fall, we would need to know that no later than May 14th. Juan, if you wanted to kind of hit this one up.
So in January, we did vote, we felt it was best to keep Route 36 as is, the 36 cutaway. And just the determining factors that we had was the low numbers that we had for Route 36 throughout for the 6 months. And then we're still doing. Okay. Is that better? Right. Okay. And then we wanted to also keep testing the trams to see what kind of data we would get. And that's where the decision we made in January.
Get it back on. So this slide right here is also what we presented on the past. This right now is using the 2024 rates. This is the cost for if you're looking at running Route 36 with a cutaway, which are the smaller vehicles or a full-size bus. And then looking at it, whether you want to keep running it as during peak service during that kind of summer, what we call the spring service change, but really during the summer season. And then, or if you wanted to run it year round. Once again, these are specific to the current cost. If there was an interest to pursue this and go year round, we'd have to update costs, get back and kind of figure out what that would look like 100% and get that number to you guys. But right now, this is where those costs currently would sit at if we were to go year round with each of those two types of buses. And then just to kind of be clear with the options 1, 2, and 3, there is no additional cost based on those options. Those are just, they would fall within the same level of service hours.
Julie, do you have a question?
Can you just tell me when does the peak season start and when does it end?
So the peak season would go from that very late April timeframe to the late September.
September 30th?
Late September.
So, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And at this point, we're kind of looking to you guys to see what it is that City Council wants to do, and we're here to answer any questions.
Yes, with that, we'll open up to council questions. General questions for Juan and Jacob. Do we have anything? Judith?
This is not a question. It is a proposal. I really appreciate the options that you presented, and I did a very deep dive into this because I think it's really important for us to get this right. Based on the community survey that we did, there was some interest in the shuttle, a shuttle or bus going to Safeway, and also for us to have more resident-focused solutions to the issues that are facing our transit problems. So I took myself on kind of a self-imposed field trip. I made 3 consecutive trips with my 4Runner. I started at the Fields Park bus stop, set my odometer to 0. I went east on El Paso to Columbia. There are 3 stop signs and no traffic lights from El Paso to Columbia. I took a right on to Columbia and stopped at the light. There's 1 stop sign there. I went to Safeway, following all the traffic signs, lights, and I went the speed limit or under. I went to Safeway, went into the Safeway parking lot, went to the front door, stopped there and circled the parking lot, exited the parking lot. And when I went back to Manitou, I counted all of the number of Metro stops that are already in place between Safeway and, let's say, the I-24, the overpass by Maggie's farm. And then I went to into Manitou to the Hiawatha Gardens Old Man's Trail bus stop. And I'll tell you why I did this. And I went back down El Paso. So I did a loop. El Paso, Columbia, Manitou, Old Man's Trail, goes in a square. On 3 trips, that was exactly 4.2 miles. And the reason why I did that was because I looked at our current map of Manitou and I looked where we have transit, right? We have the 233 shuttles that service from Old Man's Trail up to the COG and back. And we have our trams, which are currently being piloted on the west end of town, primarily the Hiawatha Gardens, Wichita, and Schmisley parking lots. And that's fine. That's a really good place to be piloting that. And for the high tourist season, I think that that's really appropriate. But when you look at the east end of town, it looks like what I call a transit desert. So we have a food desert. We also have a transit desert at that end of town. And so what I looked at is how can we, because we can't use the E-trams to go into the neighborhoods and pick up people, how can we have just a slightly modified version of what you're presenting where residents are within maybe no greater than a block or so from some kind of transit hub that also goes to Safeway. I don't think the 36 shuttle needs to go to the roundabout or Serpentine. We have transit serving that area. So my thinking is we have the 36 go to, it starts at the Old Man's Trail at the transit hub at Hiawatha Gardens. It takes a right onto El Paso and it services all of that neighborhood through El Paso, all of the way to Columbia. So you've got the 400 block, you've got the church, you've got the Castaways, you've got the Peacock condominiums, you've got the Rock Ledge neighborhood. It stops at Fields Park. People can go to the Garden of the Gods. It goes all of the way past Becker's to Columbia. What's over there? The baseball field, the soccer field, speaking of servicing lower income folks, it would go back by the trailer park. And there's also an apartment up there. There's a condominium complex and it would take a right at the Buffalo Lodge. And it would go service the trailer park there, right there when you turn on Columbia. And then it goes to Safeway. So I'm proposing that route, which is, it took me, I averaged the 3 times. It took me driving and I had an average of 3 stoplights per trip. It took me 13 minutes. And so I'm thinking, well, if we looked at about 30 minutes per trip from Safeway to Old Man's Trail, doing that loop, we could have a bus running twice an hour to Safeway to Old Man's Trail. To me, I look at Mountain Metro as being a connectivity source, right? We can't rely on one bus to get us everywhere. Sometimes we have to take a bus that connects to another bus or another mode of transportation to get us where we need to go. But to me, and also this would service the entire URA from Columbia to the swimming pool, and which is now not currently being serviced. And so I ran this idea by Councilor Shada, and he was nice enough to pull in some data and put a few slides together for this consideration. So it's kind of a hybrid between option 2 and option 3. It's 2.5 in the middle. So that's a thought I have, because to me, the 20-minute current route, people aren't riding it because it doesn't go anywhere any other residents want to go. I mean, yes, we want to go downtown, but other than that, I mean, we're pretty car dependent over there. So, and wouldn't be the 40-minute, which I think would be too long, but it would service a tremendous number of areas in our town for both tourists and residents. So if the council is even interested in entertaining this idea, Shada did pull up together some data that might, it might be interesting to look at.
I guess my feel on that is, we've gone, this is probably the third time since the first of the year that we've been here to discuss this, okay? We keep coming back with new flavors of how we're going to solve this. Each one of us could go out and we could take a car, a rickshaw, a flying airplane or something and come up with a different route. And each time we could come back and decide we want to do something different. You know, May 14th is coming up. We may need to make a decision. I'm not keen on having a meeting we set up. Staff tries to get information together for us. In this case, it's not only been our staff, but it's been Mountain Metro. They've worked hard to get the information together. And then to bring in yet another flavor of something, 11th hour, bothers me. I don't think that gets us down the road. What it tends to make us do is we all go off and come up with our own great little idea and we come back and we have something different. We might as well go off and build our own different language and come back. We'd have the Tower of Babel Part 2. I'm not interested in seeing Mr. Shada's work. Sorry. Let's go around the table and see who wants to see Mr. Shada's work. Okay. Michelle?
I would like to see it, please.
Julie, you'd like to see Mr. Shada's work?
I would like to see it, please.
Judith?
Like to see it.
Natalie?
Like to see it.
Nancy?
I have one thing to say before we see, I do want to see it, but my sense is that lately we've been getting a lot of these last minute briefings. And I think in a lot of cases, the work has been done before council in plenty of time to send it out to us so that we can look at it beforehand. So I would like to just make a plea for everybody not to send in last minute or not to bring last minute things to council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shada, I would assume you would vote to present your information. And you would vote to present your information. No, that's, you're voting. Yeah. Okay. So I guess this is that anytime we want to have a city council meeting, if he wants to dream up their own idea and come in, we can derail the entire meeting and we can push work off into the future. I don't like it. I think it's a bad policy. Council, I would ask you not to do that. I don't think I'm going to get very far tonight. So John, information. Before it. John, you're going to have 3 minutes to present your information.
So I did a quick analysis of Judith's thing in terms of where her proposed route for 36 in terms of where possible riders would be in terms of what Judith talked about, you know, a block or something like that. And the bigger the green blob I kind of analyzed was sort of kind of larger kind of population groups. And then the red blobs were basically this route would end up servicing actually some part of Western Colorado Springs. So next slide, please. So this is just a recap of Judith's comments about her proposal for what I call Safeway. Next slide, please. So here's the slide without all the bubbles. Okay. Next slide. And then, as I understand, our electric trolleys are kind of doing this kind of a route here, correct? Okay, all right. Next slide. And then the Route 33 is unchanged. And then the next slide, I kind of needed to see sort of kind of the bigger kind of route system in terms of that we could possibly kind of build in terms of the Route 33, the electric trolleys, kind of focusing downtown, and sort of this Route 36 proposal of Judith's. So it was just sort of my way when Judith was bouncing ideas off that I kind of need to see something in kind of graphic mode to see how it kind of all pulls together. So thank you.
If I may add something, Mayor? This would be a seasonal pilot. The time would not change. It would be this season, and it would be a cutaway bus, and it would be a pilot just this season. And my rationale is, and I feel like I need to address the comments from the mayor is, I'm elected by the residents of this town. And I'm voted into office to do what's in their highest best interests. And I tried to do that. And so I get a packet dropped on Friday. And I also get the city report on Friday. I had no idea until I read the city report where you were piloting the E-trams. I didn't know they weren't going to the neighborhoods. No one tells me that. So I don't get to digest this information until the weekend. And, you know, I don't get to call Mountain Metro, and I don't get to have discussions with staff, and I don't call you, Juan, and go, hey, you know, this is my concern, that this is what we're not, the issues that we're not solving. So I do my best to go, okay, well, if I want to change things, I'm going to have to get in my car and start driving around and see if I can change and make it workable within what you've brought to us. All I'm doing is taking that 36 shuttle and moving it from Ruxton to Old Man's Trail, right? So it doesn't have to go into the core where there's plenty of transit. In a way, as a way of trying to get the residents on the east end of town some transit. I interviewed 6 neighbors this weekend who thought it would be great if they could go to Safeway. And so in our community survey, people want to go to Safeway. So that was uppermost. My job isn't to, gosh, let me see if I can screw you over. It's how can we work together? So instead of doing Becker's Lane, it just goes Columbia to Safeway. I have a feeling that we're going to get really high ridership. I really think it's going to be a very popular route. The 20-minute route as it is I think I can quote the mayor, let's shut it down. Nobody takes it. Let's not do that again if it's not working. But to me, a work session is to do work, not to come in with 3 already, you know, baked ideas and all we have to do is pick one and then we can go home. That is not my job. So I'm doing my job. I think this is an outstanding proposal. I think it checks a lot of boxes, and I think the residents would agree with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Jacob, thank you so much for your presentation. If we did look at option number 4, when would you possibly be able to get the cost of this back to us?
Please define what you mean by option 4. Is that what, Shayla?
Mhm.
So we actually discussed this at the last meeting in January, the Columbia option, and it wasn't an option. That was the takeaway. We went out there, took a look at it. Some of the concerns and issues with the Columbia route was the lack of accessibility, sidewalks, infrastructure. All those were issues, nowhere to put a bus stop down. That was part of the presentation. I do have that up. I don't know if that would help or not, but at that point, second here. And ultimately, the big issue was that accessibility. And I noticed from Councilman Shada's presentation that it showed it going into parking lots. At least that was my interpretation.
Use your microphone, John.
I'm sorry, that's just how I had to do the monumentation. So just ignore those little loopy loops. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I didn't erase those.
Nope, that's helpful to know. The issue was going down Columbia. There's not infrastructure there. So I'd be concerned with particularly our folks with disabilities accessing those bus stops. Whereas right now, as was mentioned earlier, along the route or along Colorado, there's already a lot of infrastructure there. already gone through the ADA approval, gotten accessibility. People can take the vehicle there. And as we discussed at the last meeting, most of those locations, Buffalo Lodge and the other, the trailer park, were within a quarter mile of the bus stops themselves, if I recall correctly.
Julie?
Sir, can you help me? Can you elaborate? Can you help me understand why there is accessibility problems that make it impossible for us to service Columbia?
Sidewalks.
Okay, so if you have no sidewalks, you're not allowed to have a bus. Is that what you're telling us? You just gave me like a one-word answer, so I have to guess what you mean by that.
So the issue is accessing a bus stop, you have to have a location, right? You have to have a platform by which you can load individuals. In general, pretty much you don't want to start stops. There are stops out there, but you don't want to continue that practice of having just a stop like in a brush along a dirt path. Think of when you have issues with snowfall, you're going to have issues there with that. People with wheelchairs or other mobility devices are not going to be able to access that bus stop. That creates a very serious concern for equity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Judith?
Thank you for making that clarification. That's a Title VI property area over there that needs some looking at. There are some people with, pretty huge income disparities over there that need a bus. The school bus, I walk my dog over there, and the school bus drops kids off over there. So I'm just saying that apparently the school district can do that. There are several children that live over in that trailer park. But I hear what you're saying, and I want to respect that. And so perhaps we could think about in the future servicing that area, because I think that's a good article of the bulletin, that we can tell the residents we can't service you because we need to put in some sidewalks and some infrastructure and some places where we can actually offer you some micromobility, and that's on us. But if we used Becker's Lane instead, which would be even shorter, and did the Safeway to Old Man's Trail instead of the Ruxton Roundabout, that would be more in line with the third choice. And we could do a cutaway pilot seasonally for that. Is that something that's doable as a compromise?
Not fully following what that routing was.
So in other words, I started my experiment at the bus stop at Fields Park by the tennis courts. And then I went east on El Paso. So I went all the way to Columbia, but if the bus took a right onto Becker's, right, as it currently does seasonally, but took a left and went to Safeway. So in other words, we're just taking Columbia and changing it to Becker's Lane, went to Safeway and then to Old Man's Trail, and still did that loop around El Paso to try to tie in some of the residents. Would that be doable?
We'd still have to turn the bus around, or the vehicle around so when to Safeway you're heading eastbound, we'd have to have a way to turn it back to the west.
At Safeway, you mean?
We wouldn't want to use the parking lot for that. We want to use the street system for that. So it would need to turn itself back around on the streets, not in the parking lot.
So was transit to Safeway ever even really an option then?
There's a bus stop across the street from Safeway, or right there. That would be, I'm saying when it comes to turning the bus around, it can't go into we would never go into the Safeway parking lot. Maybe that answers the question. There's a bus stop. There's bus stops already right by the Safeway that we would have used, existing bus stops. We wouldn't have gone into the parking lot.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Julie?
I don't understand what you guys just said. I need clarification. So I thought you were saying once the bus gets to Safeway, you refuse to go into the parking lot, so there's no way to turn around and come back to Manitou?
No, what I'm saying is that we have to work a turnaround location on the streets. We wouldn't go into the parking lot. We'd work with the street grid system to get the bus turned around to go back the other way. But if you're doing kind of the way that and I'm conceptualizing it, the way that it sounds like is you have kind of a there and back on one end, and then you'd have a stop in the middle of the route, then it go further out, and you're creating what you're potentially causing is people that have to wait on the bus through layovers, because we have to have a layover somewhere in there. So if somebody is using it to go one way and then come back, there might be a stop mid route in that scenario.
So if you went to Safeway, you'd be able to do a U-turn or take a left somewhere or figure out how to turn the bus around to go back west. Is
Yep.
that right?
Yeah, presently with the, which was under options, our options 2 and 3 in there, there is, I don't remember the exact streets, but there is a
Yeah.
quick turnaround there that puts the bus, heading back eastbound.
Okay, I thought the way this discussion
Sorry, heading
started
back
was
westbound.
that we could not take the bus to Safeway because you couldn't turn it around, but.
I can't turn it in the parking lot.
No, but you can.
Yeah.
Turn it
There's
somewhere
other ways.
else.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And you're talking about that's at 32nd and Safeway. So there's a bus stop right where the Carhartt store is. There's a bank
Bank, yeah.
and there's a metro stop and there's also a hub for scooter hub
Yes,
there.
yeah.
That one. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Yes. So so it can be done there.
We can get that turnaround there.
Okay, thank you. So it can be done.
Natalie, did you want to say something?
So I think, I don't know how everybody's feeling about this, but I feel like we've presented an option we're interested in. It doesn't quite work with maybe where we are right now, but I don't know if that's a thing for staff, like now that you're kind of aware of what we're thinking, like how can we utilize the mobility options we have or the mobility options we could have to start achieving this goal, right? Of kind of this piece that would connect to these neighborhoods and Safeway. I mean, I think like we don't necessarily need to troubleshoot it at this point, right? Like you kind of see what we envision happening. Is that correct?
That's correct. And right now, our focus right now is that's why we're, putting the trams in use and testing them so that we can make future decisions. We're running them until April 14th, and then after that, we will have that data sent to council like on May 14th.
Judith,
So I just want to go back to this discussion because I consider work sessions where I roll up my sleeve and we throw around ideas and we really come up with what we feel as a council is the best that we can do for the residents of our town. And so that's why I'm having this conversation. So what we're now talking about is, yes, we can turn around at Safeway. The residents have indicated that is what they would like. They would like some more resident-centric solutions. This checks that box. We would not do Columbia because I do understand, and I've been over there. I get what you're saying. The city has to take a look at that. But if we did the same route that we have now, with the exception of it goes to Safeway and it goes to Old Man's Trail and around instead of going to Ruxton, it is doable. It is practical. It throws us into a greater service area. We might get great ridership numbers. I'm afraid if we go with a 20-minute option, we're going to have the same ridership numbers we had last year. And guess what? The mayor's going to come back and say, we don't have the riders. Let's just ditch 36 altogether, which is not what I think that we want to do in Manitou. We want to increase the ridership. So if it's doable and it is at a price point with a cutaway, and we can implement it as a pilot, I would like to see that happen. I'd like to see service to Safeway for our residents. That's my thought. I've been talking about this for 2 years. I mean, we can keep kicking the can down the road all you want, but I don't want to kick anymore.
I think exactly what we're doing with John's proposal is kicking the can down the road, coming up with option number 4. This is an 11th hour attack. It would have, the basic courtesy, John, would have been to let us know that you had something else in mind. That would have been the basic courtesy. Judith, you represent the people of Manitou. Yes, you are an at-large counselor. You represent all of the people of Manitou. That means the people at the West End as well as the people in Crystal Hills or in the
Mayor,
East End.
Please, can you please stop yelling?
10-minute
There's
recess.
yeah,
Now, 10-minute recess.
Yeah, do some deep breathing, please. Violating the sunshine law. This should be on the record, Mayor.
Denise, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that I think to make sure we heard, we understand what we think that we heard. So if I could take a moment, what I believe you're saying, and the question is the number 36, is that we, of course, have to keep it as is right now. Start in April next year, we do a seasonal pilot, as you mentioned, and we go from the Fields Park up to Becker's, left to Safeway, turn around, back to Trails or Old Man's Trail, and then try that during that time, the April to September, as a pilot on a cutaway. Is that what you're recommending?
Judith.
It was my understanding that we had not made any decisions about this season. So it was my understanding we were talking about this season starting in May. So if we're not talking about that, then what are we doing for the 36? Are we just doing the same thing we always do and keeping it the same?
Yeah, that
So we're
was,
talking, okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah, so yes, so all of the above and more now, because
Okay.
a lot has been revealed. And I believe that the residents on the east end of town on El Paso, we need to make that infrastructure and sidewalk an absolute priority so that we can tell the residents over there that we can get mass transit. Because what I'm hearing is we can't get mass transit to our residents who pay taxes in this town. So I want that added on to the discussion for when we come back next year to see if what our future options are, whether it's with our tram or whatever. That's our job. That's our job. And so I don't want to have to go over and tell the residents of El Paso, we couldn't even consider this for 2025 because we have major infrastructure issues. So, yes.
so what,
For the next season, I am talking about the 36 shuttle, a seasonal cutaway that goes from the Old Man's Trail Transit Hub at Hiawatha Gardens, east on El Paso to Becker's Lane, takes a right on Becker's, goes to Safeway, comes back, services the entire URA back to Old Man's Trail. That is my proposal.
okay, so I heard two different things, so I want to make sure I've heard it, and please, staff help. I heard that you wanted us to also look at infrastructure for next year. And that will have to be City of Colorado Springs, that would have to be us, and that will be, we will have those discussions and see what we can make happen. I can look at that. I just don't have a date that we can bring that back and what that would entail. So we can definitely start, but what I'm hearing just, and I want to make sure I've got the direction from the majority of council, is look at least going to Becker's, up, left, around Old Man's Trail and on a cutaway, and look at that option if nothing else, and then look and see what type of infrastructure would be required to do the other things. One, if it's anything is possible, but what would be the cost and who would own what? Is that the direction that I'm hearing from the majority of council?
We'll go around the table and ask that.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
But Nancy, you have a comment?
Just to clarify, for this season, the change, or for this coming, when the 36 starts up again, the only change that we implemented was for it to be the cutaway, correct?
That is correct.
And that decision was made in January or something?
Correct.
Okay, so if we were to pilot something like this a year from now, the decision would have to be made again by this coming December, January timeframe.
It'd be the mid-December, so we kind of made an exception this time around to
Okay.
get to council a second
Because
time.
my concern remains that there's so many unanswered questions that we still have. We've got the trams that we don't know a heck of a lot about yet. We've got the Dillon parking lot that we don't know how that's gonna, I think there's a lot of information. I am perfectly willing to continue to assess this proposal, given that, as Councilor Johnson said, you've kind of known what we're interested in, that residents. Oh, and the other thing that we may have, which I'm an advocate for, is the VIA, the door-to-door thing that I'd still like to see implemented which I think could help with a lot of this as well. So I don't think we're in a hurry. We've got till the fall to really continue to assess, right? And,
Correct.
okay, so I'm not seeing a whole lot of issues here, actually. What am I missing? You need,
I think we got the direction that you have provided tonight, which is fall, keep as is, as we always have. But we need to give you plenty of time and we need to go do some additional research and come back and talk about the April of exactly what that route would look like.
Right.
And what we can do.
so
So
we have between now and next
December,
winter and
right.
December.
Yeah.
To come to a final conclusion of
Yes.
what the following summer is going to look
Yes.
like for Route 36.
and we'll do the
And we'll
research.
have all this other data, or hopefully we'll have a lot more information on all this other data as well. And Columbia's in Colorado Springs, obviously not Manitou. So I don't know, if we get a sidewalk, they'll ever
So-
put a sidewalk there or not, but
Sorry, I keep interrupting. I apologize. So I can make a commitment that staff and Mountain Metro will come back in the September timeframe with at least some additional information. So we're not in a crisis if we got to have it now. Get a little bit more direction so that December we have that time if that works with this council.
Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
I just want to understand, if we cannot get the infrastructure in place on El Paso and Columbia to have the bus go down Columbia, then without any additional infrastructure, as I understand it, we could still do the proposal that you articulated. That was Judith and John's proposal. And we don't really need to determine for Mountain Metro whether we're looking at the Beckers or the Columbia until December of this year. Do I understand that right?
In December, and please join in December, we need to determine the route if it's going to change. That is really important so that they have their time to do their due diligence. So if it's the Becker's route or if it allows Columbia due to infrastructure and those things, then we would need to determine that in December
I
timeframe.
see. So what was all this stuff about? Oh, April 14 deadline. What was-
That's if you wanted to make any change for the fall because you wanted us to bring that back to you.
I
And
see.
it feels like the fall was staying as is. So we're really now focused on the December timeframe. And we'll come back in the September timeframe and then we'll get some more direction and then come again. So we're not in a last minute crisis. And I'll make sure that that works. I haven't spoken with Mountain Metro about it, so I need to make sure that works. And I can provide you an update in an email if that suffices for this council.
The thing that works out nicely about that, I think, timing wise, is that if we have the Dillon up and operating by then, I think that would be an important time frame to gather some pilot data on usage. So I like that. Okay, thank you for explaining.
Okay, Nancy?
I just wanted to clarify that for my own edification, that Mountain Metro was here tonight with these proposals because we requested you to come after our last briefing. So it wasn't that you asked to come, it was just that we said we want to see these routes a bit more, the options that we discussed back in January or whenever it was. So because it does seem a little premature to come back for a year from now, other than to continue as a work session to continue to discuss these things.
Yeah, it was for two reasons, as you asked for us to come back. Also, I want to make sure if this council would like a fall change, that we just don't assume that you don't want one, but we come back and give you that opportunity to give us direction as we move forward. And that's what tonight was about, was more the fall change. And then talk about later how we may want to do it in December, which this gives us some direction of how to start looking at that and bringing that feedback back to council.
Judith?
May I just make a suggestion that you put that in the packet? I mean, that was really unclear to me that because it's April and the 36 only goes May to September, so it falls between. So I was very confused about why this was coming. So if you could let us know that, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and when, that would really help me a lot. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. And we can be much more clear. We did put under recommended action for the fall 2024, but we can work on trying to clarify that a little bit more and help with that. And always feel free to call me if you have a question, but we'll work on clarification. Thank you.
Then maybe the appropriate thing to ask is there anyone who doesn't like Denise's proposal? If there's anybody who has, if there's any objection to what she proposes, if not, I would guess that would be council's direction. You all okay with that?
I would just
Nancy?
say that for fall, I personally am not looking for any changes in any of the three route. Well, there's very little for Route 36, but I'm not looking for any changes. So I think for me, I would just be looking forward to the next 2025 in terms of what we can do to implement our higher strategic interests for Manitou's public transportation.
Denise?
Mayor, may I just repeat to make sure that we're all on the same page and it's on the record? So if I may repeat, if that's okay, Mayor.
Please do. Yeah, clarification is good.
So I will talk to Mountain Metro. We'll talk about whether they agree we can come back in September. We'll talk about the infrastructure and what that would entail if we have that information, the needs and the cost. And then we'll look at the Beckers, which you have asked us to look at and see how that would be implemented along with our current route. So if you want to change, then we can look at both of those. Is that the direction I'm hearing?
Everybody okay with that?
Okay.
All right. Great. Very good then. Well, thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Juan.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Lane, Gail, thank you. Well, that was our only piece of business tonight. Can receive council correspondence if anybody has anything. Anybody? I guess not. Denise, anything from the city administrator?
Just that Thursday it is the Manny Awards, and last night was our first Citizens Academy. It was very well attended and great conversation. So I'm excited. We have 16 new individuals that's attending, and they're enthusiastic, and it was really fun. So yeah, that's the two main things that I have right now. Thank you.
Okay, great. With that, then we're adjourned.